Hello and welcome to The Content Bite, a podcast for freelancers who use their words to make money. I'm Rachel Smith, a freelance journalist, copywriter, and content producer. I'm also the founder of Rachel's List, a jobs board and community for Aussie writers and other creatives.
Hello, and I'm Lynn Testoni. I'm a journalist and a content writer as well, and Rachel and I are your weekly co-hosts, and every week we're bringing you all kinds of tips, ideas, and some fabulous guests to help you make the most of your freelance business.
Hi Lynn, how you going? How's your week been?
Oh, pretty good. I'm very wet, but busy, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, me too. It's I think I had maybe 2 hours of clear skies on the weekend at Newport, and it was just there was no chance of going swimming or anything like that. My parents were like, don't get in the water anyway because it'll just be full of gunk. So it was a bit of a wet, waterlogged weekend on the beach as well.
Yes, I did finish a book, so that's good.
Oh, good one. Yeah. Well, we are back on the pod with another amazing guest this week, and we're kind of returning to what we were doing a little while ago where we talked to successful freelancers, which I really love because it proves there are so many different ways to make a living using our words, and we can really learn from how other people do things.
I agree. And making a living from words is what we're all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're both thrilled to have Emma McMillan join us today. Shall I do the intro this week?
Please do. Tell me all about Emma.
So Emma McMillan is an SEO website copywriting coach, and she's hosted the podcast Not Just About Copy. She works with small business owners and organizations to clarify their message and show up consistently, all while striving for a work life in flow. God, work life, yes. Emma's specialty, we'd like that. Emma's specialty is getting to the heart of a message and supporting her clients to share it with others. She does one-on-one copy coaching to empower business owners with the skills and confidence to write better copy and connect meaningfully with their audience.
Welcome, Emma. Is it weird to have someone read your bio? Does that ever get any less weird?
No, it's always cringy, but thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
It's really great to have you. And I'm so interested in what you do and where you've come from, because I'm pretty sure you haven't come from journalism. You come from teaching, you were saying, offline. So tell us a bit about your journey and how you got into copywriting, because we have so many creatives from all facets listening who always love to hear how to, get into that discipline and how you did it, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. And I know for me, I've always been so fascinated at people's own journeys to get into a career in writing as well. I think when I initially started too, I was thinking, I don't have a marketing background. I feel like I'm, behind the 8 ball in a way. But what I've realized over time is that it's those unique experiences that help to really differentiate us. And I guess we can bring a whole lot of different skills depending on our different backgrounds. And it makes for a richer tapestry, I think. So look, my background is in secondary education. I was a high school teacher for 12 years before I started copywriting. And so that was, putting on large scale musical productions and teaching drama, dance, and English. So that was kind of my bag, which, it was hardcore. It was a lot of fun, but it was an incredible workload. And one that I sort of decided once I was thinking about having a young family that might not really align with that. There was lots of weekends and evening rehearsals and things like that. And I thought, I think there's something else, for me to do. And I actually had a background in creative writing. So that was what my degree was in, at that time, sort of around 2000. It was really tricky to know what to do with a degree in creative writing. I didn't think a life in journalism was for me. And I certainly didn't have a book in me. So I went back and kept studying, and I did actually a diploma of dance and business management. I thought maybe I'll open a dancing school. And then I decided, no, that wasn't quite right. But, the business management skills have actually served me well many years down the track.
Yeah.
From there, I just traveled while I had to think about it, and then went into teaching. And I knew it was something that I was good at, something that I would enjoy, but I also knew it wasn't my forever career. So I guess in the back of my mind all that time, I sort of was kind of thinking, I wonder what the next thing will be. And so it was actually while I was on maternity leave, which was back in 2016, that I really started to put the wheels in motion and think, look, if I don't want to go back, the administrative load was just becoming out of control. I thought, this is the time, I think, to explore something else before I get stuck back where I was before. So
back on the treadmill.
It's so funny how many people have that same story. Sorry to butt in, about when they're on maternity leave. It seems to be a real, I mean, you are exhausted, aren't you? You're completely sleep deprived, but it's also a real time of reckoning and what do I want to do going forward?
Oh my gosh.
I've heard that over and over from women.
Oh, you're so right. Me too. And what I found about it was, I was tired and I was busy, but I didn't have the mental, I guess, stimulation that I had got from my work. And I actually had time to think. You know, I think when you're in a full-time role, it's impossible to actually dedicate that time to thinking about, you know, what's next and dreaming. You know, you're just so true. Caught up. So those long walks with the pram and whatever, there was plenty of time to let my mind wander. And I had sort of thought, you know, I'd heard the term copywriting. I didn't exactly even really know what it was. I sort of knew it was related to advertising in some way. And I thought, I wonder if there's a way of me getting into this that doesn't require me to go back and do, you know, like full-time study or something like that. Because I thought that's a big investment of time and also money. You know, I don't know if that's the kind of retraining I want to do. So I sort of started exploring courses, and I looked into the Australian Writers Centre, and they had some fantastic short courses. They were just sort of 5 weeks. So I did one of those at nights, and it actually felt really good to be, you know, using my brain and kind of learning these new skills and also solidifying what I thought I knew from my existing training. Was like, I reckon this is a goer. So I did their 5-week copywriting essentials course. And then I did their 5-week how to start a successful freelance business course. And I found those both just gave me the confidence I needed just to get a website built. And so for the next sort of 12 months, I went back to work a couple of days a week teaching, but I had started building the business on the side. And, you know, by the end of 2017 or September 2017, I'd left teaching and decided, like, I'm all in. I thought, I don't want a backup plan. I want to actually commit to this new career. And I think that's part of it too. For me, you know, I didn't want to have the fallback. I just wanted to say, right, let's go, let's make this work.
And how long did it take you to establish a business that, you know, where you were earning, you know, enough to get by, or even more than you were earning as a teacher?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. And it's also one that sort of, it's a little bit hard to quantify, only because I was sort of still had a young child with me at home. So I guess each day I added an extra day of work. So I sort of went from, you know, 2 days copywriting to then 3 days to then 4 days. And then last year in 2020, my son went to prep. So finally kind of turned the business full time. But I'd say probably, you know, when I was working 4 days, I had easily surpassed my teaching salary in a way that felt so much more meaningful for me and so much more like I was in control of what was happening, which was pretty exciting.
Yeah,
that absolutely is really interesting. That's great too. It's also nice. I think some people, it's great to hear that somebody can make a full-time career out of copywriting, out of writing generally, because you hear so many sort of negative stories about that, don't you?
You do. You really do. And look, I mean, I'm not going to lie. You know, I think the number one key to the success of my business personally has been persistence, like showing up every day. Even when, you know, in those early days when I didn't have enough clients, that was when I just sat down and I thought, right, I'm going to write a blog article. I'm going to publish it. I'm going to send reach outs to people. I'm going to, you know, there was always something to be done. And I never used it as an excuse not to sit down and just do the stuff. So I think those early years, I mean, when I look back now, I think like it's a lot of, you know, grunt work. There's a lot of, you know, uncertain times, and you're thinking like, I'm doing all this work, I'm not charging that much, you know, like when will I get to choose the sort of clients I want to work with? And you sort of, it feels really yucky at times because you just can't see what's coming. But it's like just every little bit gives you that bit more confidence. And for me, you know, a lot of it was about building out a referral network as well. And that just meant like, I just turned up to things. I just met people. I just, you know, I mean, I had entered a whole new like sort of space, I guess. You know, I came from education, I didn't know anyone, you know, who was either had a small business, you know, that my friends don't run their own small businesses. Well, they do now because I've met them all, but at the time they didn't. And I didn't have friends who were, you know, making a career out of it and this kind of thing. So I thought I just have to meet people. So yeah, I just joined groups. I went to things that, you know, joined the Rachel's List community, places like that, where I actually got to have conversations with people and find out what other people were doing, but also, you know, sometimes get that referral or that overflow work and things like that. And it's amazing, you know, some of those, they take years to pan out. But, I got a call this week from someone whose my name was passed on to them 3 years ago, and she hasn't had a need to call me until now. So sometimes you think because it's not an instant kind of result that, is it kind of working? But it's like what we were talking about before we went live. It's about that consistency. It's just about building and trusting that those things will come back in the end, and I'm the same. I love referring work on to other people too, and supporting younger writers coming through. So I think it's sort of this beautiful environment where people give, people receive. It's a beautiful karma network, I think.
Oh, for sure. Very circular.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you about how you need to be so proactive in those first years, just while you get it all rolling, and then it does get easier, but you can't stop for a minute, can you? I mean, I always go back to my cold calling spreadsheet that really got me the first couple of really big copywriting clients, and it just snowballed after that. But that was like hundreds of companies and marketing departments I rang. So you've got to be so proactive, I think.
Yeah, you do. And you have to remember that everybody started somewhere. Like, it can be so tempting to, scroll your social feed and think, oh, such and such is so, so ahead of me. They've got this amazing business, but they had people, they had days in the early days of their business where they couldn't get a client, or, where they launched something and, didn't have a full enrollment, or, like, everybody had those moments. For me, the best thing I ever did was send an email to a list of contacts that I had and just basically said, this is what I'm doing now. If you know anybody that could benefit from some copywriting, just send them my way. And that's how I got my first few jobs, just by telling people in my network, what I was doing. And I felt really confronting, to kind of put it out there to friends and family and say, like, starting a new career, like, this is what I'm doing now. But, what are you going to do? Like, that's what you have to start with.
It's the same. I did the same. And I put something up on my Facebook page, my personal Facebook page. And because of that, somebody saw something, who then met somebody at a school gate who knew was looking up for a copywriter. And then she said, I think I just saw something. And that was my first big client, who is still my biggest client to date.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it is,
you have to do that, otherwise people have no idea.
Doesn't
what
have
you're
to
doing.
be salesy. It's just
no. But I'm really interested in the courses that you did. Did you meet people through those courses, or were they very insular, do it in your own time, or were there Facebook groups attached to them back then, or not?
No,
really?
Look, there might be now. I'm not sure. But when I did them back in 2016, it was, you sort of had a weekly module that you listened to in your own time, and then there was an assignment to do, and then there was recorded feedback that was provided to you. So the courses were run by Bernadette Schwert, who was fantastic, and she's someone that I've met, in person, following that time. She's full of knowledge, but at that time it wasn't a sort of an interactive experience. There was a bit of a Facebook group, wasn't particularly active at the time, but it may well have changed. But certainly, getting those basics was great. But yeah, I sort of looked around for, I guess, networks of other small business owners too, because it wasn't just the writing piece. I mean, I guess after the courses, I felt reasonably confident about the writing piece, but then it was like, how do you start a small business, and what do you need to do? And all the hats you need to wear, which you both would know so well.
Yeah. We constantly talk about it.
We do. The running the business is not why you start writing, is it? It's just one of these things you realize suddenly that's what you're doing, and you have to get a whole new skill set as well.
Yeah, but you know what?
Yeah,
I love that bit. And I love the fact that I'm always learning new stuff. I think it so appeals to me, the whole...
As a teacher, former teacher.
I love a process. I just love to add to what I already know. So the challenge of the actual small business piece has been much more rewarding, I think, than what I expected to.
I agree. I actually love the fact that I'm in charge of my own destiny and my own income. I actually really like that. And after years of working in big corporates and having other people decide how to spend the resources, I just love having that choice myself. I think that's really good. But we might talk about the actual copywriting, because Rachel and I have chatted about copywriting a few times before, and a bit about SEO, which is relevant for your niche. But you specialize in website copy, don't you? What's different about writing for websites?
Look, I think there's quite a few things that are different about them. And I guess the biggest difference is that when somebody comes to your website, they have specifically chosen to come there. You know, it's not as if they're consuming content about you via like a social media feed where you are one of, you know, many bits of content they're consuming at that time. People are really there, I guess, by choice. And so you've kind of got a more captive audience, I believe, in some ways, and the chance to really speak to your ideal client in that moment. So that's kind of the biggest difference in terms of how people might consume your content. And although they can enter from any page, you know, the majority of website users do come via your homepage, sort of your website front door, if you like.
Wow. And so SEO, where does that come into it? Is that further training that you did as well?
Yes, I actually did. I did Kate Toon's big SEO course, recipe course, and that was great. And then I just literally, you know, dug my fingers in and just kind of got into the process of actually rewriting my own site. I rebranded back in 2020, new website, kind of new brand. And I thought, I'm going to just make sure that my training worked and I'm going to do it for myself and see what happens. So I actually did, you know, the keyword research. I mapped, you know, different target keywords to each page of my site, wrote SEO optimized copy, kind of, you know, using the best practices that I'd learned, and then kind of actually saw, you know, it's amazing. It works. You know?
Who knew?
Who knew? So that was a really great experiment for me to do, and also a great sort of, you know, inbound marketing tool as well, because what I realized is that, you know, SEO, yes, it's about, you know, choosing the right keywords and actually thinking about a structure for your whole site kind of quite strategically, but also it's not ever about, you know, keyword stuffing or about just kind of ramming keywords in for the sake of it. It's got to be for the user first, always, you know. And every time the, you know, the Google search algorithm updates, you know, it's always becoming better at realizing, you know, when does content sound really robotic or kind of written in a really formulaic way. And it really wants to see, you know, content that's conversational, that's optimized for people to actually, you know, read and make sense of. So part of the struggle that I have had over the years, well, not struggle, I'd say challenge, is trying to explain, particularly to larger sort of more corporate clients or organizations, that conversational copy is actually in and rigid formal copy is out. And I'm sure you two are all across this.
Yeah, that's true. And some clients are not quite comfortable with that, particularly sort of, I guess, more sort of formal clients or bigger ones, as you say.
And so, you know, have you found it's good to niche into just website copy? And how do you find your clients for that niche?
Yeah, good question. Initially, I niched kind of by, I guess, industry, and I niched in education because I thought, well, that's where I've come from. So I feel really comfortable in that space. And I had a beautiful retainer client that I worked with for a couple of years in the education space. And I guess that's too where I built a lot of my confidence around website writing, because that was kind of one of the main projects I was brought on to do, was a rewrite of their, you know, Australian website, then a UK version and so on. And so as I did it, I started to think, yeah, I love the more meaty side of these sorts of projects. You know, I originally, when I started, I did, you know, a bit of website stuff, but I did a lot of blogs, I did a lot of social media, emails, you know, kind of anything and everything. But for me, I really like the opportunity to, you know, just stick my teeth into something and just like, you know, really get to know a brand. And a website is a beautiful way of doing that. So I decided, yeah, actually my niche is not an industry. It's actually a style of copy. So it's that. And then it's, you know, as a different arm to my business, the copywriting coaching, which kind of brings my teaching piece in. But in terms of website clients, look, it's a real mix. I actually started tracking about a year ago to see where my leads were coming from and which ones converted, because I thought, I think I know, but I actually should probably make a habit out of doing this. And it's really fascinating. And I'd encourage, you know, anyone to do that. And I think you've got a tracker for that kind of thing too, Rach, in your tools. But I found it was literally about a third from Google. So search, which obviously, you know, the optimization of my site for the search engines really helps with that. A third came from sort of personal referrals, people that I knew. And then a third came from like networks and communities that I'm a part of. So it was really interesting. And it just also really helps me to focus my marketing efforts in the right places too. You know, my clients don't often come from social media, you know, so that might be somewhere where I go and I have a bit of fun and I build a community there. But when I'm thinking about marketing to my clients, that's maybe not where my marketing efforts need to go.
Did you use Google Analytics to track to set goals and track those incoming leads?
I just used a good old fashioned spreadsheet, and as I got an inquiry come through, I would just, track them in my sort of, inquiry column. And then, depending on what happened, I would make some notes about, did we talk? What was the budget? Did the project go ahead? Did I refer on? What happened to it? And it's also been a beautiful way to then follow up with clients too. And I know that you did an episode recently on the power of following up, and I completely, agree with how valuable that process is. And so by tracking where those leads sort of came from, I was able to see not only which ones converted, but which ones, didn't convert and why, and which ones, didn't convert yet, but had potential to down the track as well. But I tend to work with a mix of, larger organizations and then also small business clients as well. So I don't write websites from scratch for new businesses. That's who I would coach through copy coaching to kind of get a new website off the ground. But the people I work with for website copy have usually had their small business for maybe, 4 or 5 years. They've gone through a rebrand or a refresh, or their messaging is not landing anymore, or they've updated their services and they're feeling like this is just not representative of me anymore. So they're wanting to, I guess, take a look at the whole thing and think, which direction do we need to go in now?
Is it hard talking clients into new websites? Or I guess the way you're saying it, they've already come to you wanting to make a change. So what sort of things are must-haves for a website? Do you find that they're missing key things, or do you have a formula? What do you do?
I think the first thing to do is just to have a really good conversation about, firstly, get on the same page. Like, what are your goals for this project? Mm-hmm. What do you think you need? But also to find out why, because sometimes, somebody might come and say, I need a 10-page website, this is what I need, But then as you tease out the conversation, that might be like, well, why do you think you need that sort of page? Like, what would the value be of that? Or, have you thought about combining this section with this section? Because that would actually be a stronger page if these things were combined. Or maybe instead of having an FAQ page, you could actually sprinkle your FAQs actually on the pages where they're really relevant, and therefore, boost out your SEO kind of content on that page around that particular topic. I guess it's about acknowledging what they are coming to you for, but also being brave enough to sort of say, well, hang on, like with best practice in mind, this is maybe how I'd suggest structuring, or this is where I'd suggest, a layout change or an additional page, or, because ultimately you don't just want to give them what they've come to you asking for. You want to give them a website that actually performs really beautifully. And so that's one that, considers the customer journey through the site and how people will actually navigate it and interact with it. A lot of people, don't think of things like call to actions, right? They don't think about actually telling people, what's the next step, where to go from here. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's little things like that where, you could have this great section of content, but if the reader gets to the end and they don't know what they're supposed to do, are they supposed to call you, or are they supposed to look at a service page for prices, or what are they supposed to do? So thinking about actually, and I map it out on paper first, where does each page go and what connects with what page, and thinking about, which pages link internally to others for a really good sort of user flow. Another thing people sort of need to think about, in my opinion, is the way that each page is structured, with the hierarchy of, your H1 heading, your H2 heading, your H3 and so on, so that also Google understands, what's the most important content on this page, how do I actually process this information, and then writing content in a way that is digestible on screen. So bullet points, sharp, short sentences, not these sort of waffly long paragraphs, because people don't consume content online the same way that they consume it, when they read a novel, for instance. And so I think it's really important to understand that, people skim and scan. They need the important information really easily accessible. People don't need to have website pages that are, 1,000 words, or if they are a long page, how could you concertina like an FAQ section at the bottom? That means that people don't have to scroll and scroll and scroll. It needs to feel approachable. Break it up with images, relevant images, images of your face if you're a small business owner, like actually an opportunity to engage people So it's those simple things, or the font size, make it big enough so that people can actually read it easily. What does it look like on mobile? Have you actually checked to see if it looks good on mobile or if it's all cut off and, skew with? So there are lots of different things to take into account. So the conversation that you have at the beginning is absolutely critical. But I also think that if at any point as you're working through the process that you feel like you want to recommend a change to the client, it's best to do it while you're still in it rather than at the end. But something I always say to a client too is at the end, I want to give you another bonus proofread once the site is actually live, because it's one thing for me to write the copy, but depending on how it is designed and actually put up, I just want to make sure that it still looks like what I was intending for it to look like once it actually goes live.
Wow. I just was listening to you thinking I'd be really scared for Emma to look at my portfolio website. But also there's a part of me that is a real masochist and wants you to look at it and just go, oh, Rach, oh dear. Yeah,
but you know what, Rach? We all have websites like that. My old website, as soon as I was about to move on from that, I just was at the point where I thought, if anybody else sees this before I get the new one, I'll be so embarrassed, because you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think it's more important in the beginning. So if you are a new business, my advice would be get something up, because you've got something to be able to build on. And also the longer you've been around, to be found in the search engines, the more credibility you'll be able to build over time. So don't put it off, but it's something that can continue to evolve, and it should evolve as well. You shouldn't be putting content up and then just never adding to it.
You mentioned pages that are 1,000 words are a real no-no. I mean, how do we know how much copy to write on a page? I know that Lynn is often writing websites for builders and that sort of thing. And often I'm asked to write people's websites as well. And is there a word count that's best practice, or does it change constantly? Does it change depending on the website, that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, it can change. Look, I would say typically around sort of 400 words for a page is kind of a really nice amount to digest in terms of how it appears on the screen. But if people are wanting to beef out those pages, I'd say, that concertina style of FAQ, for example, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think, 1,000 words where it's just to scroll through. It's different if it's a blog, for example, that serves a different purpose. But if you're trying to get across, information, for a service-based business, for example, it's just too overwhelming in terms of the amount of content.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you think a blog page or a news page is still necessary? It was always a thing that if you had a blog page, that helped keep your copy or your content relevant and up to date. Do you think that's still necessary, or have blogs had their day?
It's an interesting one, and I don't think there's a hard and fast answer to that. But what I will say is that if you do have a blog page, then it's all really about how you use it, and sometimes, in respect to what I was talking about before about that you want to, not put your content up and set and forget it. Sometimes the blog is one way that people, can update their website more regularly by adding, blog articles. But I'm also a huge advocate for, using our time really efficiently. I am trying to work in a way that feels really balanced. And so if you are going to, write blog articles, then please repurpose them, so don't just write the blog, but actually write the blog, repurpose it into a newsletter, some social media posts and things like that, so that you're actually making it work for you. But also, if a blog is not the way that you like to start, for your content strategy, then don't force yourself into it either. For me, I realized I just didn't enjoy starting with the blog so much, but for me, starting with a podcast episode has been a great way for me to kind of get my thoughts together. And then from there, I'll then repurpose that into a blog article, but I don't start at the blog. And I don't write blog articles that often because they're a lot of work, to do a really good quality blog article is a lot of work, and that's where you do want your really lengthy pieces, and you want to have them be really, well researched. You want to map some keywords to them that are actually terms that people are searching for. You want to have internal links within the article, potentially external links. So, it's not something that you can sort of just whip up. But at the same time, I used blogs in the early days, I guess, as like a portfolio when I didn't have necessarily client work to be able to show potential clients. So, it can be useful if you're in the earlier stages of your business to sort of be working on that as a way to have, I guess, a version of a portfolio out there. But yeah, I'd say it definitely requires some sort of strategy in terms of how you're going to approach it. And I think the worst thing you can do is say, I'm going to put up an article every week and then put that pressure on yourself. For me, I might do like one big, key piece every quarter. And then, if something else comes to me, I'll do that. But otherwise, I'll just repurpose that bigger one into lots of different, smaller pieces throughout that quarter.
Wow. You must have worked on so many websites in your career, or since starting in 2016. What have been some of the really memorable ones, or some of your favorite ones that you've worked on?
That's too hard. I can't say in particular, but I will say what I love is when people are really open to the process, and when they really can see the difference that a good website can make, and when it actually really, converts. Like this education client I was working with for a long time, ClickView, they're an educational software provider for schools, and they launched their new website, and the traffic that was coming through, that they were tracking was really exciting, and it made it feel very satisfying. But also they were then really proud of what people were coming and finding too. And I think that's part of it. It's not just for small business owners, but organizations too. They suddenly feel like they want people to come and see what they've got on their site, because they're really proud of the way that people can interact with it, and the way it looks, and the way that it's sort of uniquely them. I think one of the traps that particularly small business owners get into, and I was guilty of it myself, is to create a website that kind of is a bit of a catch-all, like this is for everyone, but also that's not a long-term strategy. It's actually by getting really clear on what you do and how you do it differently to other people, that then really starts to magnetize those ideal clients. And so I think it's people understanding like, I'm getting contacted by clients who are a really great fit. It's like, that's because they see themselves in your messaging. You're now talking to those people. You're not just saying, I work with everyone. So that power of like really narrowing the message and the impact that can have on people, just thinking like, if I'd done this before, if I kind of narrowed it down, I didn't realize that by narrowing it down, it would actually just feel so much more aligned, and like those clients are just such a good fit.
Oh, that's nice. It's interesting talking about the analytics. After all these years, do the analytics still surprise you about what people click on?
Sometimes I think there's a page that's really great and I can't understand why it's not getting the traffic that it is, and there's all sorts of reasons for that. And I too, like, I'm a big about page viewer. Like I love looking at other people's about pages, but I think for some people that's not as important. The homepage will always get the majority of clicks. That is the way that most people will come through the website. But, there are ways by optimizing, pages for different keywords that you can try and encourage traffic through different pathways, and also by crafting, your titles and meta descriptions in a way that that really encourages people to click through. Yeah. So look, I'd say homepages, very popular. About pages, sort of the next most popular. I mean, I never buy anything from anyone unless I've given their about page like a really good, really good read. Service pages, are quite popular as well. So, if anybody is investing in a new website, for example, I would say the home, the about, the services page, break them down for individual services if you can, but even if you can't, just starting with sort of a catch-all services page, and then a way for people to contact you, that they are really the essentials. And then the other things are sort of the icing on the cake. And, if you've got the capacity to build out pages as you grow your business or as you grow your brand, like that's really useful too.
Are there any sort of key elements that people forget to include on their websites that you just see over and over? I know I was on a website last week and it was an absolutely brilliant website, but when I went to click on the socials, they didn't link out. And it's things like that you forget to check, or can just be dormant on your site for months on end. What are some mistakes people make?
I heard a horrifying story of someone I know who they didn't realize, but their contact page hadn't been working for like a month. I think it's just something that you go through every now and again, and you just, you click all those links.
Do an audit type thing.
Or I pay my website designer to do quarterly maintenance on my site. And so I just know that she's checking all those things and just making sure it's all working, or getting someone else just to look at it. And watch them kind of interact with your site, see where they go, see what they do. If there's anything that they're not clear about, there should always be a call to action, at least at the bottom of the page, and you may have other calls to action throughout the page as well. Always a way to contact you. I mean, it doesn't matter what that way of contacting is. Some people like to be called. I don't like to be called. I've got a really thorough contact form that I like people to fill in. So it's just about sharing, the information that people need. If you want to include pricing information, then make sure you do. But just, I guess, thinking about what are the questions that people always ask you, and are they answered on your site? And in fact, that's a really good way to build out, your FAQ section or any kind of content, is to think, what are people always asking? And for me, a way of making sure that I don't say the same thing all the time, every time I get a discovery call, is to just make sure that things around my processes are really clear on the site already. Things about my values and so on are really important too. In a way that's really useful because it helps people to understand, am I a good fit for them? Is it going to be a good match if we work together? So I think thinking about how you're going to actually find your best fit clients, what do they need to know about you? So some of it, you don't have to have your values on your page, but for me, that's a really nice way of finding those really aligned matches. Having a really detailed contact form is a way of seeing, well, do people actually want to step their way through my process? And if they're happy to answer these sort of 6 questions, then it's a good chance that, we'll have a good call afterwards. But if they, read the form and think, oh, I'm not answering that, or they just say NA, and I think, I'm not sure, maybe we're not going to actually be the greatest fit to work together. So building in those little things that maybe are unique to your business, that are sort of your little check boxes in a way.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I've got like a form a bit like you, and mine was really long and no one was filling it in. So I cut it right back. And now I would say it's really 30% people fill in that form. 30% will just email me off the bat and tell me what they want. And the other 30 will just call me straight from Google. So it's interesting how people, decide to approach you, I suppose.
Yeah, isn't it? And look, I think you can do all the things to, sort of lead people down a particular pathway. Like I know for me, when I niched, I specifically said, I'm doing websites and copy coaching, but people will still email with other things. Sometimes they're like, this is what I need. It doesn't matter what you've said, but this is what I need. Yeah. You can do your best to sort of funnel people through or, funnel them away. But some will always sneak through to the keeper.
Absolutely. Well, you just touched very briefly on pricing just then, and I know that's something that our listeners are always interested in. So how do you price your projects, and do you prepare a project price or a day rate? And what if someone was to come to you and say, I just want those 3 key pages, home, about, services? Is that something that you would price on a page rate or something like that?
Pricing is such an interesting one, isn't it? And it's something that's evolved so much for me over the years. Look, if someone was to come to me wanting a 3-page site and they didn't have a site, I would encourage them to sign up for some one-on-one copy coaching. And it's something that we would co-write together, and I would help them to build out those 3 pages. And so that kind of is where that sort of project would sit. But if someone comes and they're wanting to refresh a website that's in existence, it would likely be at least 5 pages. You're just kind of 5 to 8 pages for a small business owner, and potentially longer than that for an organization. And so the best way to price that stuff out is by project. The thing about a day rate, and it's something that I do offer to my existing clients, but not to new clients, because I really like to have a good understanding of the brand before I do a day rate in most cases. But a project rate is great, because what you're then saying is, well, look, yes, there is a time-based component of this project, but also it's value-based as well. And I don't want someone thinking, this number of hours means, this is the price, the thing, because it's also about, what is this actually going to do for your business and as a marketing tool. And by having it as a project too, it allows you to build in things like those revisions and, parts of the process that don't fit into a day rate. So someone I've worked with before can book me for a half day or a day. and they get deliverables that are really on brand because I know their tone of voice, I know their brand already. But if I'm just delivering copy for someone I've never worked with before in a day rate capacity, there's every chance that, it's not going to entirely land the first time, which it won't, because, part of the process of learning a brand is that, that feedback and that revisions and so on. So that is a really important thing to me. And I always really encourage people to be really collaborative with that revisions process too. I really want to get someone on a call or on a Zoom and actually talk through, like, let's get on the same page with this. What does this mean to you? Why is this not landing? Like, what could we use instead? What are you loving? What words would you never say that I've used? And so on. Because it doesn't matter how thorough the brief is, there will be things that need clarification. It's a good opportunity to sort of justify the copy decisions that you make as well. So I always look at it as like a project. And I guess for a project that is sort of around 5 pages, I would probably, allow around 4 weeks for a project like that. Gives me time to brief in with the client, gives me time to really background research. And that involves, looking at the resources that they've shared with me, but also doing some, good old fashioned social media stalking and things like that to kind of really get into their tone of voice. That's if we haven't also signed on to do a tone of voice guide, part of the project, which can be part of it too. I'll dig into like their reviews and pull out voice of customer, things like that. And only then will I actually start to draft the copy. So that initial process before I even write a word, that's really valuable. And that sometimes, if I was to cost that in hours for the client, that might be a little bit of a trickier sell, because it's not sort of, it's not the writing, but I can't write the good copy without doing all that research as well first.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But it's about being
absolutely.
really clear. I have a proposal I send out and I outline all the steps I'm going to take and what the purpose of each of those steps is, so that, when they sort of see the cost at the bottom, they know, well, this is all the things that are included. And this is a bit around the rationale for the project. So, back in my early days, I'd just send an email, this is the price kind of thing as a quote. Whereas now I sort of understand the reasons why, framing that up with, this is your business, this is what you do, this is the objective for this project, this is how we'll work together, all that sort of stuff. It helps to explain what that value is.
You talked about retainers earlier with one of your first clients. Do you use retainers? Do they work for you? And how do you sort of draft them up?
I don't love a retainer, honestly.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't. I love the flexibility and I love the ability to take on what I want when I want. So I have taken them on from time to time. I actually just did a 6-month one with a beautiful furniture design company, and I enjoyed it at times, but then I kind of got a bit itchy with it. And I knew it wasn't going to last because they were going to hire internally. So I sort of thought I'll take it on for 6 months. But I just like the freedom to be able to move things around in my week, and also to take on exciting things that land in my inbox without having to worry about having capacity to fulfill them. I mean, sometimes it feels a little bit crazy, because I think, a safety net always feels nice.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, while I was building the business, having that retainer was incredibly reassuring because it meant that, I did have that stable income sort of for years 2 and 3. So I'd say, for people in their early days, they can be quite valuable in terms of providing that stability. But I'm so established now, and, I know that the work is coming, so I don't worry about that anymore.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so I would consider it, but it would really have to be a great fish and something that didn't lock me into a particular day of the week as well, if I could move something around within the month. But often people want, every Wednesday or every Monday. And I think, I don't know. What if I want to go and do something else on a Wednesday?
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because retainers for so many people are the holy grail. It's that regular income. You don't have to worry. It comes on the first of the month or whatever, and you've got work locked in so you can plug stuff around the gaps. But I totally know where you're at, and I agree with you. I want the freedom to move stuff around, and I like the idea of a retainer, but I also want to be very much in control of when I complete the work. So yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it?
It is. And who knows, I might change my mind in a few years. I might think, oh, retainers are where it's at, but who knows? Yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever feels good.
Okay. Well, what do you love about a good website when you land on a website and it gives you those bing, bing, like you can see the little cartoon, like, fireworks going off, not literally, that would be really naff, but, in your head where you think this is amazing. I mean, for our listeners who are creating their own sites, what do they need to think about to generate that feeling of this is awesome in someone who lands on their site?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that, as a human, you want to feel connection. And so I think you need images of you, of yourself. I was approached recently to collaborate with someone, and I went to check out their website and I couldn't find a image of them anywhere. And I thought, I feel like I don't get a sense of who you are. You're telling me about the work that you do, but I want to see your face. And so I think, images and you can get headshot images done, reasonably affordably. Now you don't have to go for a full branding shoot, especially in the early days of your business. But I would say that is a way that you can really quickly establish more of a connection, and we've all done, the pictures of the hands on the computer or the typewriter and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that it doesn't show me how you're different to another writer, for example. Yeah. And, so imagining that someone is, say, looking at, copywriting, and they're looking at my website and they're looking at 2 others as well. It's like, how are you standing out? What are you saying that's different? And what is your USP? What is your unique selling proposition? And often it's you and it's your unique background. So for me, for a long time, I, tried to pretend like I didn't come from education. Like, oh yeah, I've always been a writer, that'll make me sound more credible. But actually, the further I went into my career, the more I realized that's actually what's unique about me. I didn't come from marketing or journalism. I came from this background, and especially as I'm moving into the coaching space as well, coaching people to write their copy. It's like, as a teacher, like that's such an incredible background to have, to be doing that work. So I think it's about sharing enough of yourself through your site that people can actually feel like they could get on the phone to you and start a conversation. That there's actually, they know something about you, and you could be professional, but also warm, and yes, thinking about what's your tone of voice? What are the things that you say? What are your idioms, and not trying to sound like somebody else, just leaning into your style. But of course you can follow, best practices in terms of structure, like, strong headlines that really kind of capture my attention. Like, I've got a really good idea of what you do. There's nothing worse than getting on someone's homepage and reading the headline and, the subhead and thinking like, I still don't know, like, what do you even do? It's not clear. It might sound like all kind of zingy, but there's actually, I'm still confused.
Yes.
Yeah. We've all been on sites like that.
Yes,
haven't we? And the picture thing is so important. We just did in the Gold Group, I think everybody on a Share Tuesday, we made them share their websites, and there was quite a few where they hadn't put a picture of them anywhere. And I said, people want to know who they're working with. You definitely need a photo, even just a small headshot of you on the About page or something, because you do go looking for it, don't you? You want to see who's that person that I'll be hiring potentially.
Yeah. And I know, like, sometimes for writers, it can feel sort of overwhelming or vulnerable to put your face out there, but ultimately, before you start writing, you're going to be having conversations with people. You're going to be, engaging them in conversation and so on. And so whether you like it or not, you do kind of have to be front and center. And it is a way that you can differentiate yourself. And, like, as you go on in your journey, branding can be really important as well. It just helps to give, a stronger sense of who you are, and also create some alignment across your different touch points too. Like, for me, getting my branding done, it was finally like, oh, okay, now I know what all my different platforms and touch points need to look like. There's a consistency, and I want for someone to get on the phone to me and think, that's exactly what I was expecting based on what I've read, what I've seen. It's really weird when you get this disconnect between what you see of someone and their online, profile, but then when you hop on the phone, you think, oh, this is really not the same thing I was expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But one last thing I will say too is that the navigation and the structure of the site should make sense. You know, I love it when I can just see all the options that I think, you know, should be there. Like, I want to know the services. I want to know what it's like to work with you. I don't want you to call your pages funny names so that I can't work out, you know, is that your about page? Is that your services page? Like, what? Just call it what it is. You know, I think some people try and be a little bit tricky and clever with that stuff, but I don't think it necessarily helps with the user experience, especially when you're just getting to know a brand. Might be different if you're familiar with the brand, but just kind of being really clear and thinking about how people will use the site.
I love that. Well, we ask all our guests, as you would know, being a regular listener, about their tech tips or their favorite programs or services that they use that they'd be lost without. So give us your laundry list.
Yes. Well, it's long, and I know you've spoken about a lot of them before. So I'll talk about a couple that I don't think I've heard you speak about recently. And one of them is Airtable. I use Airtable for social media scheduling. And that's really nice because the way that it works is that it kind of looks like a big sort of Google sheet in a way, but there's room in there to add your images and things in as well. You can toggle tasks to, you know, in draft, you know, completed and so on. And I've got an OBM who works with me, and so I create the content, but she schedules it. So it's a really good communication tool for us to be able to use together. And I can kind of see what it's going to look like rather than just we used to have a Google Doc just full of copy, and it was just a bit of a nightmare because it just went on, and I couldn't really get a sense of what it would look like. So that's been really useful. But I also love Loom. I record client videos all the time for clients, especially when I'm sending website copy. And I would strongly advise anyone who is creating website copy in particular, but also I do this for other projects too, just to create like a 5-minute walkthrough video for a client with this, you know, the screen recording. You can use other programs, Vimeo and so on, also do this kind of thing. And it can just be really valuable just to talk a client through what it is that they're looking at so that they know sort of how to approach it, because maybe they haven't seen a copy deck before and they don't actually know how to picture what's on the page, or, you know, it's a good opportunity to, I guess, to justify some of the decisions that you've made around certain things. And also it's a really handy way of knowing when a client's actually looked at your copy, because you get a notification once they've watched the video. So, you know, rather than sitting there and thinking like, have they even opened it? Haven't they? Like, when do I follow up and so on? You actually have a bit of a sense of where they are in the timeline.
Oh, that is interesting.
That is such a great tip. I use Loom as well, but mainly for Rachel's List staffing, training and things like that. But to use it with clients, that would be a game changer. I like that idea.
Clients have really found it so helpful, and it just, I think it's really great. You know, and you can choose to pop yourself in the bottom of the screen, or you can choose, you know, if you're having a bad hair day, just use the screen. That's fine. But it just helps to hear your voice, I think, talking through what's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing.
So you did send us a bit of a link of where to find you, which we'll put in the show notes and everything. But where can people find you and find out a bit more about what you do?
Yeah, sure. So the best place to find all the info about me is my website, which is emmamcmillancopy.com. And there you can find out all about my website copywriting and my copywriting coaching.
Mm-hmm.
I also love to play on Instagram, and I'm at Emma McMillan Copy. And the podcast is called Not Just About Copy, because it's not just about copy, but it is a lot about copy. Copywriting, language and connection really are the themes of that. And it's an interview podcast combined with tips in alternate weeks for writing better copy.
Fantastic.
And it is a fantastic podcast.
Yeah, we both listened to it.
Love it. Yes. Emma, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. This has been one of my favorite episodes, talking to you. And I think it's going to be really helpful for so many of our listeners out there who write website copy for their clients or want to polish up their own clients and just haven't got that handle on it that perhaps they could have. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rachel and Lynn. It's been my absolute pleasure.
It's been lovely to have you, Emma. Thank you so much for giving us time this week. And I think that's it. That brings us to the end of the show. So we'll see everybody again next week, but please do share us on social media or give us a nice little review and a bit of love. That'd be great.
And we'll pop all the show notes in our podcast app, which is on iTunes, I think.
It is.
Yes. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.